Nope, mute. Okay, sorry. Um, Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second iteration of our Team Science Skills series put on by the Georgia CTSA. I just want to take a moment before handing it over to our facilitator to talk about future workshops coming up. So after today's team formation development, we'll have workshops on effective communication, developing trust and psych safety, leading teams, managing, leveraging, and mitigating conflict, coordinating multiple related teams, and evaluating and improving team performance. And so that's until May of next year. So we'll be doing this for a little while. So sign up if you haven't already. You should have had the option when signing up for this one. And if you want to sign up again, I'm sure we can make that happen. But today's session will be on team development and formation by Shawn Burke, who's at the University of Central Florida. To be honest, Shawn is a central figure in all of team science. She's almost 15,000 citations. She could have given, I know I just went over all of those different topics, but Shawn is such an expert in teams. She could have given a session on trust, leadership, adaptation, training, selection. She was nice enough to do this for us on team formation and development. And a real other benefit of having Shawn here with you all today is that she's worked with real teams. She's had several federally funded grants working with teams on the ground or in the wild. This is business teams, military teams, healthcare teams, space and science teams. She's a really good friend and a really great presenter, so I'm happy to have her here. And Shawn, I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay, thank you for that tremendous buildup. I can live up to all that. Let me see if I can get my screen shared. Okay, thanks, Lauren. All right, so thank you. Oops, already starting off good, slides are going without me. So thank you guys for spending your lunch hour of all hours with me. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about team formation and development, like Chris said. So Chris already said a lot of this stuff, but just a little bit about me. So I'm at the University of Central Florida, and I'm at the Institute for Simulation and Training, which recently just became a school. So that's why you see School of Modeling, Simulation, and Training. I am an industrial organizational psychologist. I graduated from George Mason University back in 2000. Ever since then, I've been at UCF. And like Chris said, my research interests really deal with team effectiveness, broadly speaking, looking at how can we better understand and facilitate team effectiveness within complex environments. So everything I do has an eye towards team adaptation and building team resilience. Most recently, I've been doing a lot of work with NASA in the areas of team leadership and team roles and cultural diversity. And Chris already mentioned I like those teams that are kind of very mission critical, high stakes, where when things don't go well, you usually have experts, and when they don't go well, that there's really some a pretty dramatic outcome that can result more than just at an organizational level. So with that said, I really wish that we were all in person so I could see all of you. I only have this small strip of people on my monitor. What I'd like to do is I want to start off getting you guys in a breakout group. Lauren's going to put you guys in one in a minute. We're going to take about 10 minutes. I'm going to divide you guys into kind of somewhere around 5 to 6 people in a breakout group. And I want you guys just to begin to get to know one another. So your name, your area of interest. I'd like you to share one item off your bucket list. And then I want you guys to come up with a team name. We give you guys about 10 minutes to do this, and then we're going to come back and you get to elect one person on your team to kind of share your team name and why you guys chose it, along with one interesting fact or feature about the group. So with that being said, I'll let Lauren go ahead and place you into the breakout groups. So welcome back. So what I'd like to do is I'm gonna kind of call on the person, I guess it's the bravest. I'm gonna ask someone to be first and kind of share your team name, why you guys chose that, and one interesting feature that you guys decided to highlight. And if nobody volunteers, I'll pick somebody.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm Asma Ali. So our team is the Medical Superheroes. We are a group of people who work in different disciplines in terms of medicine. We have psychology, nursing, pharmacy, and the medical school, and physiology. So we are the medical superheroes.
I'll go next. I'm Kelly Stout, and our group name is the Travelers because everyone had a bucket list item that related to traveling, probably because we haven't been able to do that in quite a while. And I would say that's our sort of key shared characteristic.
Thank you.
And I'll go next. Our group name is very similar to the previous one. We're the Atlanta Flyers. We are all located in Atlanta for the most part, and also have that shared interest of traveling. But in particular, one of our members wants to skydive, and so that's why we're the Atlanta Flyers.
Thank you. I think there's one group left.
I can go next. We are the Fantastic Four because we are made up of 4 women who are all fantastic, spanning the School of Nursing, Rollins School of Public Health, and Mercer University Pharmacy School.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that everybody, Lauren? You said we had 4, right?
Yes.
Right. So thank you guys. So hopefully, a couple ideas of why I want you guys to do that. Number one, given that everybody is distributed, it's another way to kind of begin to see some of those interconnections between you guys, and to begin to build some type of identity. That's also why coming up with the group name, and hopefully that'll make it easier as we move forward. But I also want you guys to think about. I'm gonna have you guys do a couple of breakout activities, not as much as I'd like to because we're gonna run out of time, but as I go through, I'm going to try to reflect back, and I'd like you guys to reflect back on, on some of the things I'm talking about and how it may have come up or may have applied as you're going through some of your breakout groups. So that was another kind of reason for that. So if we move on. Okay. So today, kind of the agenda is I'll talk a little bit, just very briefly, about basic teamwork concepts. I don't know how much background everybody has, so just a few very fundamental stuff. And then I'll jump into team formation, and I take a rather broad view of team formation, so I'll talk about that. Then we'll move into team development, which tends to be a little bit more formal activities. And then closing remarks at the end, and in terms of resources, and I think Chris and Lauren have a couple things to say at the end also. So to begin with, teams are awesome. Teams are great. If I could rely on my speakers to work really good, I would have played a little Lego movie that talks about, everything is awesome. I'm not going to sing for you guys, but anyway, everybody thinks a lot of times what we see is everybody thinking that teams solve every problem. Right. And we just need to take a whole bunch of experts, especially if we're talking about science teams and academics. We do this all the time, right? We work on teams to build proposals, to run experiments, to do publications, and we're always looking for what's the best expertise on that team. However, unfortunately, sometimes by the end of it, we end up with, this kind of Jack Nicholson from The Shining, and that's kind of hopefully not the murderous intent, but that's what we want to avoid. So teams aren't always beneficial. Teams aren't always fun, and they're not always actually useful, believe it or not, coming from a teams researcher. So what does it mean to be a team? Teams have been defined basically is a set of 2 or more people that are working together interdependently. That's a big one. They need to be interdependent. There needs to be some coordination requirement there. And they're working adaptively towards some common goal. That does not mean that they can't have sub-goals that sometimes are in conflict with one another, but there's some kind of common higher level goal. It may be, you know, working towards a publication or trying to get a research grant in the case of science teams. And they're nested. So they're nested within organizations, within your university or within your department. You know, you've got individuals nested within this collective, which tends to be nested within this higher order thing. And all that stuff kind of comes to play in terms of thinking about their effectiveness. So when we talk about teams, there are a wide variety of teams and a number of ways that teams can differ. So just to kind of give you guys like the 100,000 foot view here, and some of this stuff will be talked in more detail as you go on through some of the other talks in the series. But so teams can range in the degree of diversity, and I'll talk a little bit about that today in terms of they can be very homogeneous to being very heterogeneous. They can be unidisciplinary, so they can come from everybody working from the same scientific discipline. You know, we don't see that as much anymore. All the proposals and the research calls and the funding agencies are really pushing for more of this multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach to research. Size, they can be very small, they can be very large. Proximity. So I'm not sure how much this one is true in the current environment, but they used to be able to be co-located as well as distributed. Goal alignment, like I said, you know, their goals at the higher level and kind of sub-goals can be very well aligned, or they can be misaligned, especially as we start talking about kind of cross-functional teams and what's valued. You know, I'm in a business school and I'm collaborating with someone in psychology, it's collaborating with someone within engineering, and we all have this goal that we want to get this publication, but what my department values might be very different than what your department values. And we have differences in boundaries. So you can have very stable teams, probably more commonly anymore, or teams that are fluid to different degrees, where, you know, you might have some core team, but you've got members on the periphery that might be rotating in or out. And then lastly, and key for me, is the degree of interdependence. So you can have teams that are very low on interdependence and really function more as a group. So there really isn't this big need to coordinate our actions. We can all kind of do the same thing. You think about, you know, sometimes a brainstorming group would fall along that, or you can have teams that are highly interdependent. And I think when we start talking about science and research teams, they can vary along those. I would imagine that you get your most productivity when you're on that higher end of interdependence, provided that you're composed correctly. When we think about what are the things that go into a team and trying to understand them, what we normally tend to talk about is a framework that's an input, mediator, or what's going on, the processes, and the outcomes. So if we put it in the context of science teams, the outcomes might be published articles, grant submission, maybe I'm trying to learn from somebody else, or personal growth, and then well-being. The processes that we might see, so there's been a variety of team processes talked about within the broader literature, but when I think about science teams, I think some of the ones that clearly come out in terms of processes or communication, so the ability to communicate clearly and concisely, the ability to coordinate with one another, and the ability to manage conflict. So there will inevitably be conflict in teams. I don't know of any team, good or poor, that does not have some level of conflict. So it's really about learning how to manage that conflict. And I know you guys will hear a specific talk on that a little bit later. Those processes, or the way we work together, are impacted by emergent states, which are things that tend to be attitudinal or cognitively driven. They do change over time, but they don't change as quickly as the processes do. So here, when we're talking about science teams, you could see things such as psychological safety, which is the degree to which I feel like the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So this is very important when you start having multidisciplinary teams where you're brainstorming and want to be creative, because it allows me to speak up and offer my ideas that maybe somebody else doesn't know about without fear of any type of retribution. Trust is also important. Cohesion talks about the bonding of members to the team, and that's, to me, that's important, especially as we, you know, I can think of many times working on proposals and you're at that last minute deadline and everybody's like, you know, stressed out and willing to pull their hair out. And it's really that cohesion that allows you to kind of keep moving forward and going above and beyond sometimes what you might normally do. And then the other thing that I want to call out is more of a cognitive state, and that's transactive memory system. And that is really being able to take advantage of the expertise within the team. So one of the things that you're going to see is that diversity, my view anyway, is that diversity is good. And especially when you're talking about science teams, if you're tackling these really difficult problems, then you tend to have diversity on your team in terms of the expertise. So transactive memory systems talks to the idea that I don't need to know everything about my problem, I don't need to know everything about my problem. But what I do know, I need to know is who on the team has expertise in what area, not only so I can weigh the input that they're giving me, but I know if I find some type of information that's relevant, I can push that to them. And it's really kind of this division of resources in terms of cognitive load within teams. Let's see. The last thing is inputs. So this is kind of what we tend to think about when we say, what can we do to form the team? How can we change it when we're when we're first starting to put that team together? And it tends to be a lot about the individual attributes of the team members. Okay. All right. So with that kind of as this broad background, the next question is kind of, well, okay, so how do I make an effective research team? So I'm going to begin to talk about team formation. So how do you form an effective research team? What factors should I be considering? And how is there a perfect combination? How do I weigh some things more than others? When I talk about this, like I said, I'm going to take a rather broad perspective. A lot of times when we hear about team formation, people just talk about composition in terms of what are the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. I take a little bit broader picture than that. But to begin with, I want to give you guys some practice, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about that. So you guys should have gotten materials on the front end that Lauren had sent to you. And so we're going to do a little activity. I'm going to put you guys back in those same breakout rooms, and then you're going to have to listen to me talk for a while. So this is the unfortunately the breakout group activities were kind of back to back. But the idea is you're a new assistant professor in organizational psychology, and you're looking to form an interdisciplinary team to study the psychological, physiological, and cognitive effects of commuting on work and families, and the implications this holds for infrastructure design. So in the packets that Lauren sent you, you should have a list of candidates, and you have some of their characteristics. I'm going to change the instructions a little bit. So what I want you guys to do when you get into your breakout groups, work for about 5 minutes independently and select kind of what you think your top 3 candidates would be that you'd put on this team. And then Lauren's going to give you a warning after 5 minutes. And then I want you guys to collectively work together for 10 minutes to kind of come up with what the team's top 3. And let's see, to what degree those are the same or different. And then as we move forward, and I start to talk about team formation and team composition, we're going to kind of reflect back on some of the things that you guys did. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. So can someone from the Atlanta Flyers tell me what's the 3 people they chose?
Yes, this is Tony Lemieux. We chose Dr. Wayne Tate. We chose Dr. Sasha Ng and Dr. Jai Cabrera.
Okay, thank you. And what about the travelers?
This is Kelly Stout, and we picked Dr. Tate, Dr. Ng, and Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. They're fantastic 4.
We picked Aaron Powers, Gilbert Roy, and Gabrielle Cohen.
And last but not least, the medical superheroes.
We picked Dr. Cohen, Dr. Roy, and Dr. Powers.
Okay, thank you guys. So in listening to you guys, there are some overlaps, but there's also some differences. So just kind of things to think about here is, you know, did you select only the senior scholar or the junior scholars? Did you place kind of expertise or in some way status above? Did you sacrifice potential attitudinal problems for the fact that some people might have had the higher degree or more pedigree? Did you think about how these members might fit together with one another? So a lot of times when we're talking about team formation and team composition, we think a lot about the expertise levels. So their task-related expertise, especially when we're working on proposals and stuff like that. You know, who do I need to fill the gaps that the call is asking for? However, I think sometimes science teams and organizations in general pay less attention to how well those particular members might work together beyond their task-related skills. So how well might they actually work together as a team? So we can talk about task work knowledge and teamwork knowledge, or team fit in that sense. Okay, so I wish I could come in and I could tell you there was one perfect answer. But as a lot with psychology, there is no one correct configuration. The most important things I wanted to get you guys to get out of this were, number one, that personal biases, personal experiences always influence your decisions. Two, diversity is valuable, but it also comes at a cost, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then three, which I just said, is it's really imperative that you consider the fit not only in terms of the task-related expertise, which is really easy, but then think about how well might these in this case, these three people work together as a team. You guys. Okay. So, okay. Sorry, I saw someone had a chat, so I was going to see who it was. So when we think about team formation, like I said, I think about it a little bit broader. I think about what do we need to do to create the right conditions to give the team the best chance for performing well. And so Hackman and some of his colleagues in Harvard came up with like 5 questions, and I'll talk, some of these I'll talk more than others, but the first thing is my team real? And what I mean by that is there a need to have a team work on the problem? Does the problem require coordination? Is it a team task? So teams aren't good for everything. Sometimes groups are fine, sometimes individuals are fine. So that's the first question. A lot of times we just tend to throw teams together and don't really consider, is there really this level of interdependency required? And what you see on the right-hand side are just different levels of interdependency, going from pooled, which is much more like a group activity, sequential. You can kind of think of this idea of like an assembly line, and then going up all the way to that intensive box, which is everybody's coordinating with everybody. The team has a lot of authority to self-manage their processes. So is it a team task? Does the team have clear boundaries? If they don't kind of set them, who's in, who's out of that team? Do they have specified authority to manage their work processes? And this doesn't mean that they have total carte blanche, but again, having some ability to manage what they're doing and the way they go about their task is important because it helps facilitate their motivation and allows them to take advantage of some of the expertise within the team. And lastly, is there some degree of membership stability? So we know that teams now, they're probably less stable than what they were 10, 15 years ago with multiple team memberships. You guys are probably on multiple science teams, multiple proposal teams, depending on the research question. But without some degree of membership stability, it gets very hard to be able to form the shared behavior and aspect that allows teams to coordinate and work well together. The second question is, does the team have a compelling direction? Do they understand what they're supposed to be doing? Is it clear? Is it concise? Again, clear, concise direction is motivational, and it gives them a way to kind of evaluate their progress. The third one I'll spend a little bit more time on, which is, does the team have an enabling structure? and I'll come to that in a minute. Fourth is there a supportive organizational context? So you don't always have control over this, but it's good to be aware to what degree does the organizational context support the use of teams. So I'm going to go back to the proposal example because that's probably where I see it the most. Everybody's encouraging people to collaborate across departments given the complexity of the problems. However, you also, when you collaborate across departments, and you're also worrying about percentage of credit and where people will publish in journals and how that's valued. So again, all that kind of stuff comes into play. And then lastly, is there expert coaching available? And I'll talk about that as we go forward. So jumping to, so I was going to talk a little bit more about the enabling structure. So what can I do when I'm beginning to think about putting the team together? So I haven't selected anybody yet, but I'm thinking about it. So my first question are, do we have core norms, or can I set up core norms within the team? And within teams, some of those, especially when you're talking about science teams, norms that encourage people to capitalize on the diversity of resources that are present within the team. So having this openness, having it really fostering this this climate, if you will, of the team as a learning, I'll say organization, but the team as a learning entity. And that goes to kind of the second point, norms that promote real-time adjustment of strategy and environmental scanning and team self-correction. So teams sometimes have this tendency to start their activities and you get kind of ingrained in that and you keep moving forward. There needs to be norms within there to make sure that they don't get in this notion of groupthink, but they're being aware of the environment. Hey, a time deadline has changed, or we're coming up on our time deadline. Is our strategy working? So kind of that real-time adjustment. And that's okay to do. The second thing under enabling structure is how the work's designed, right? So when I bring a team together, members are going to kind of identify more with the task if they see it as meaningful and they experience some type of sense of autonomy. That's going to make them more likely to give it their all, versus if I'm just working on a proposal that someone has kind of forced me into because I need to check a box. And the last one is kind of how should I compose my team, and that's what we'll spend most of the time kind of talking about. But so what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I need on my team? What size do I need on my team? And that's more traditionally where people kind of focus when we start thinking about team composition. There has been a lot of work done on team composition. This comes from Morganson and some of his colleagues in terms of what are some of the social skills, the personality dimensions, and teamwork knowledge that have been shown to foster effective coordination and collaboration and ultimately performance within teams. The main thing I wanted to point out here is, again, that it's not just, a lot of times, I would say most of the time, we think about this in isolation. So we think about the fact, oh, extroversion is good or agreeableness is good. But we don't think about as much in terms of how do these things fit together. I've got a 3-person team. What if I have everybody really high on extroversion? Does that hurt me? So it's really thinking about the combination of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I know you heard some of that, I think, last week by the first speaker, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. The other thing that I wanted to mention when we're thinking about team composition is it's not only the knowledge, skills, and abilities. I do a lot of work in roles. And so, as a part of a team, good teams have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. But in addition to that, what we see are these more informal roles that exist within teams and serve to facilitate team effectiveness. And so this is some work actually that we've done and others. And when you think about roles, which are just sets of behaviors that people do, we can kind of think about them in terms of those roles that facilitate task accomplishment and roles that's the task roles, and roles that facilitate the team bonding or cohesion within the team, and those are more the social roles. Again, we tend to see a lot more emphasis on the task side of the house. So you can think about when you're comprising your team, you know, do I have the type of people that would engage in these kind of things? Or if your team's ongoing, do I see these behaviors being done? So you've got the team player, which is the person that kind of always steps up. You know, they're willing to task completer. They're willing to do what needs to get done. And we all need those on the team. They're always willing to offer their support. We have the coordinator. So who is on the proposal team? You know, who is working to make sure that all the deadlines are being met and all the sections are being done when they're supposed to be done, for example. The information provider, that person that's passing that information back and forth. We also have the critic. So teams have a tendency or have the potential to kind of get in this notion of groupthink, especially if they're similar, if the members are similar. So having somebody on the team that can serve as that devil's advocate or that critic is a really good thing, especially when we're talking about science teams where you're trying to come up with novel ideas and think about why, you know, what might our roadblocks be. On the social side of things, we see stuff as the team builder. So that person that's organizing those lunches or organizing those happy hours, that's trying to go in and manage and motivate the team members. We see a little bit about the jokester, maybe not so much within the science teams. You might need that as we start getting close to kind of deadlines and people get stressed out. You know, just that person that knows how to come in and kind of relieve some of the tension and the stress. And then also in here are things that we don't want. So we don't want the person on the team that's constantly trying to seek attention for the sake of seeking attention. And you can sometimes, I'm sure we've all been on teams with people that have very high status in our field and feel like, and sometimes are more of that kind of attention figure because of their status. So that needs to be balanced. And then that negative. So you want the devil's advocate, but you don't want someone that's just constantly complaining because that really serves to hurt the team. So pulled some stuff here that really begins to talk about some of the, like I said, in almost all teams, there's some degree of heterogeneity. But here's some stuff that's a little bit more specific to kind of academic science teams, just kind of some tidbits. So again, the reason that we can't always say, you know, this is good is because it depends a lot on the context and what we're looking for. So high levels of conscientiousness within the team has been shown to be good for performance. That kind of makes sense. But having a mixture of extroversion and agreeableness is what helps to build cohesion within the team. If I have a whole bunch of introverts on the team, it's really hard to build that cohesion. So having that mixture. There's been research done that talks about publications where the authoring teams are a mixture of, you know, gender heterogeneous teams, get more citations. The thing that I like, or I think is interesting, you know, postdocs were found to more likely to lead to breakthrough publications than grad students or technicians. They potentially have the time, they potentially have that knowledge to be able to devote to some of that kind of stuff. So that might be a good mixture on your team. And then involving senior personnel sometimes can lead to, has been found to lead to publications in higher impact journals. Even though reviews are often blind, sometimes those senior personnel have a much better understanding of what that journal is looking for. So all this kind of brings up this notion of heterogeneity and diversity. And I think especially when we're talking about science teams, you really see this notion come to play. And when we think about diversity, you can think about those things that I can very easily see. And those are, that's called surface level diversity. So, you know, age, race, sex, I can easily see how you're different from me. And if you think of kind of this notion of an iceberg, a lot of people use that surface level diversity refers to the top that's above the water, right? And that impacts, you know, how I behave, how I think or feel towards other members. I might have views about particular, you know, women or men or age or different races or their reputation, which is sometimes surface level depending on status signs and symbols. And those surface level features tend to impact us very early on because they're things that we can really see. And what they can do is they can serve to kind of divide the team and have the team end up in kind of cliques or fault lines, which I'll talk about in a minute. But over time, the thing that's been really important and has shown to really impact team performance are these deep level diversity, which is the underlying values and psychological characteristics. So think about personality, think about your values, your cultural values, your discipline values, things that may not be readily apparent. They lie under the surface, and because they lie under the surface, if we look the same, there's a tendency to assume that you're thinking the same way as me. And so if you act in a manner that's unexpected, I might attribute that action inappropriately based on kind of my mental model. And so sometimes these deep level diversity characteristics remain hidden, and they serve to cause conflict within the team. And they serve to kind of, both of these things, both surface and deep level, can serve to cause fault lines, which are just kind of these hypothetical dividing lines that may end up splitting your team into kind of this in-group and this out-group. And it's based on one or more attributes, the splitting. The more attributes that the groups are similar on, the stronger that fault line is. So if I have a team that part of my team is, you know, I've got 3 males and I have 2 females. My males on my team are also from the same discipline, and my females from the team are from a different discipline. That's going to be a much stronger fault line than if I have males and females that are all from different disciplines. You know, you can think about it, where might they find their similarities? So fault lines exist, and I think it's hard to create teams, especially in the age that we're in now, without fault lines because of this fact that diversity is valued. However, fault lines in and of themselves aren't bad. Where they become a problem is when they become activated. And there are several things within your team context that can do that. So here's some research on the bottom here that talks about a team that had dormant fault lines. So they were split in terms of race and gender, yet they had somebody on both of those subgroups that were very entitled, and that ended up bringing up and activating those fault lines. I'm going to skip this a second because I just went through that. Again, the context is really what serves to activate these fault lines, or whether they just remain there. So you can think about, you know, when you've got a team, a lot of times we talk about trying to build this superordinate identity when we have a very diverse team, because that tends to allow the team members to find something else that's uniting factor. Think about the activity I had you guys do to begin with. So everybody's coming from different disciplines, yet you know, you did something to be able to find something that united you. You can also play with the environment to make fault lines more or less visible, right? So, you know, signs and symbols. If I'm in a room and, you know, I've got, maybe I'm on a medical team and there's all these medical things, that is going to become much more to the forefront than if I'm in a room that doesn't have lots of posters about medical stuff. So again, it's about what cues or people are picking up on. And research has shown that sometimes when we start getting into very strong situations, so think about, you know, I'm under a deadline, you know, that kind of serves to, strong situations can kind of make the presence of fault lines not have as big an impact as they might normally have. So kind of in conclusion here, in terms of team formation, it's not always about selecting the best individual team members. You really need to think about not only that individual task expertise, but how those members actually fit together, not only on a task level, but on a team and interpersonal dynamic level. Diversity is critical. When diversity works well, it allows the team to have a wider range of opinions and values, which can be very important when we start talking about science teams. And then the degree to which you can keep your team small, you want to have it, you know, big enough to do your task, but the bigger it gets, the more overhead and coordination demands there are on your team. So what I'd like you guys to do, we're not going to go into breakout rooms because I think I'll probably run out of time, but I want you to take maybe 2 minutes just to yourself. And I want you to think about, from your perspective, what do you think are the good characteristics of a good team? We've talked about some of them, but if you think about a team that you've been on that seems to work really well together, it achieved its outcome, and you enjoy being a part of it, and contrast it with a team where maybe things didn't go as well. What were the distinguishing characteristics of those two? What made one a good experience while the other one maybe a less perfect experience? Just I'm going to sit here on my watch. Just think about that for about 2 minutes and kind of get that in your head. Okay. Does everybody kind of have an idea in their heads? Can someone from, let's see, the Atlanta Flyers, someone give me an idea of a characteristic that they felt distinguished between their good and their maybe not so stellar team?
One characteristic that came up for me when reflecting is everyone on a good team, everyone felt valued and appreciated versus, on the not feeling that in the poor team.
Thank you. What about the medical superheroes? Anybody from medical superheroes? Somebody, anybody?
Hi, yeah, I go.
Thank you, Asma.
I thought like somebody, like someone else would like to speak. So for me, I think a person who would be like good team player, a person who would be punctual or who does the work without complaining about like how busy they are, and people who are open-minded and flexible, and they're open-minded for other people's suggestions.
Thank you. That's a good one. Fantastic Four.
Yes, I would like to share something. So I was in a pretty much collaborative work and work with different peoples. So here's my experience. So in a good team, I agree. We should value each other's contributions, even though we make different type of contribution. No matter small or big, we should feel evaluated or appreciated or valued. The other one is, I think, is most important thing is communication, open communication, like set up a regular meetings, everybody can free express themselves, to formulate the trust or comfortableness among the group of people long-termly. I don't expect that will happen over one meeting. That could be happen multiple meetings, and they need time to build up that trust.
Thank you.
For the bad team, I experienced very dictative leadership from group leader, which is a disaster.
So non-inclusiveness. Okay, and the last group?
I think you mean the travelers.
Yes, I think so, yes.
This is Kelly Stout. Everyone's already hit on my experience idea. So if someone else on the travelers wants to talk, feel free.
This is Sina. I think what I've noticed with good teams was everyone had respect for each other's opinion. And even if you were from diverse, different backgrounds, you still respected what they had to contribute. So I think that was it.
Thank you. So I heard communication, respect, trust. I heard notions of being able, psychological safety, being comfortable speaking up. And I also heard about having good leadership that was inclusive leadership, and all those things are excellent things that that serve to distinguish oftentimes good group experiences from poor ones. So, in thinking about that, then we've talked about team composition. What I want to kind of end the talk with today is more in terms of how do teams develop. So let's assume that either we can't form, we already have our team, or the team was just set and we're now on that team. So we don't have the luxury, let's say, of picking who I want on my team. So what do we need to know about how teams develop and what I can do to maximize their effectiveness, which is really team development interventions. Let me see if I can kind of get through this. So when we think about how teams develop, so just as individuals develop from birth to death, teams also develop. And there's kind of two schools of thought, or two big schools of thought, in terms of how teams naturally develop. So this is, no interventions, just kind of put a group together and kind of what do they do. The first one is work by Tuckman. And this is really his idea, is that groups go through these stages of development. And this is a very kind of lockstep process, in the sense that at each stage, the groups have some type of, what do I want to say? I'll say conflict, but it's not necessarily conflict, but they have some type of thing, some type of challenge that you're trying to overcome. Once they overcome that challenge, they can then move to the next stage. And there's been some recent work that has suggested, his original ideas were you kind of went from forming to storming to norming, and you never went backwards. However, recent work would suggest that there is some back and forth here. But this is important because depending on kind of where the group is and in their stage of development, will have implications for the type of interventions that we might want to use. So they start off kind of in this forming stage, which, think about assuming that most of you guys didn't know each other and you got in those breakout groups early on, formalities tend to be preserved during that. Everybody tends to be polite. You guys are still strangers at that point. And you really don't think of yourself as being in a group yet. You're still much more kind of individually focused. And the main thing that groups are trying to figure out there are kind of, why are we here? What are we doing? And so I'm going to talk a little bit. There's an intervention known as team charters that are really good during that forming stage. The next stage is storming. So this is where we tend to see we're getting a little bit more comfortable with each other. I might question, oftentimes during the forming, somebody that's very extroverted might emerge as a leader, or at least an initial leader. During the storming stage, people might begin to challenge that leader. They begin to challenge others' ideas. So this is where we really see a lot of kind of conflict begin to come out as people are trying to begin to understand their roles and responsibilities within the group. So conflict management is important here. Then the group progresses into norming, where now I'm beginning to identify with the team. I feel part of the team. And the team begins to work on setting up established rules for behavior. What's acceptable and not acceptable within this team. As we go into the performing stage, this is where we want the groups to be. So open and trusting atmosphere, because there's this open and trusting atmosphere, hierarchy becomes less important because everybody's opinion is valued. And there's a number of interventions that come into play there. And then eventually most teams do have an end. That's the adjourning stage. And here, you know, if things went well, then you see a lot of pride and accomplishment. If things didn't go well, then you might see some regret or, you know, some negative aspects here. The other kind of approach to team development, and they're set up oftentimes as a or B, this or that, but they're really not. Is this idea is that as groups are working on their tasks, it's not so much the idea of have I managed these sets of, let's say, conflicts or activities, but it's really much more about the time. So Gersick and some of her colleagues talk about this midpoint transition. And the idea is if I have a task that's like for 10 minutes, let's say, that I'm working on, groups tend to have this tendency that about the halfway mark, so let's say 5 minutes in that case, that there's a natural tendency to kind of stop and reflect and maybe change my strategy at that point. And then, you know, begin the second phase of goal-directed activity. That's important for us because that's the time during that midpoint transition is a really good time to come in for some of our team development interventions because the group is more receptive to interventions at that point because they're naturally kind of beginning to think about their progress. And this ties specifically into some work that's been done on coaching. I won't go into a lot of this. I don't know what the leadership person is going to talk about, but so when we talk about coaching for teams, Hackman and colleagues talk about there's these 3 different types, right? So all coaching isn't the same. And what I do as a coach, what I do as a leader might be different depending on where the team is. So very early on in the team's task or in the team's development, the type of coaching and feedback that I'd want to be giving is really motivational in nature. And what I'm trying to do is to make sure that to minimize the freeloading, to minimize social loafing, and really build shared commitment to the group. As the group progresses, and now they're working on their task, then I shift, and the type of coaching that I give to the team at that point is much more around performance routines and strategies. So this is the kind of stuff that we would give kind of more at that midpoint transition to make sure that they're not kind of just blindly getting into one set way of acting or one direction and not really paying attention to what's going on within the team and outside the team. And then lastly is more educational in nature. This tends to be given on the back end. Okay, so let me see if I can go through this, my last couple slides here a little bit quicker than what I'd wanted to. But so then the idea is if we have an understanding how teams begin to develop naturally, what can be done to build and maintain team coherence, which is just kind of the shared affect and behavior and cognition that allows them to coordinate. And that's where team development interventions come in. And there's kind of, in the literature, there's kind of like 2 broad types, team building and team training. They can be used to support teams that are struggling. They can be used to provide further growth to teams, as well as to just make sure that good teams remain good teams. This slide, I just wanted to show you guys, there is a science behind this. Too much detail to be able to go into exactly how to do all this. But the main thing I wanted to pull out here is that early on, you can do this notion of a team, there's tools and methods. You can do this notion of a team task analysis, which really begins to go in and unpack where your problems are, identify the tasks that comprise the job. The difference here is once you kind of have my task, I've got a science team, this is what needs to be done. For a team task analysis, you go in and within those tasks, you begin to unpack which of those actually require coordination, which of those do I really need to focus on building in those team KSAs. This serves to kind of give you, what or why do I need a team development intervention, who needs to be involved, when do I need to give it, and how it will be implemented. So that team task analysis begins to allow you to set the stage of what to choose from. So I'm just going to very quickly kind of go through some of the team building and the team training ones so you guys have an idea of what's out there. So team building is probably what most people think of when someone says team training, I mean, most lay people think of it's not focused on skills. Team building tends to be designed to improve interpersonal relations and social interactions within the team. So think of ropes courses, you know, people going and doing the what do you call it? The you know, escape rooms. And depending on the team building course or class, you know, it can emphasize goal setting, interpersonal relationships like the trust development and resolving conflict. That's where a lot of them tend to focus on. Role clarification, as well as problem solving. When designed well, they've been found to improve team outcomes. It tends to have its biggest impact on more of those effective kind of outcomes. So like the trust and the psychological safety and stuff like that. Research has shown that goal setting and role clarification tend to have the largest impact. A lot of times when teams aren't performing well, it's simply because everybody does not have a clear understanding of what they're supposed to be doing on the team. And that's a really simple fix that oftentimes gets overlooked. Another team development intervention are team charters. So this would be, this type of intervention is very useful early on in the team. And it's a structured activity where the team comes and they clarify their expectations and obligations to the team. So you think of it, you know, beginning to set up the norms for the team. And some of the common areas that tend to be addressed in team charters, you know, what's our purpose? You know, how are we going to operate? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable in terms of behavioral norms? And how are we going to manage our process? How are we going to be judged? Then we kind of move into what's known more team training, and there's a wide variety of strategies that fall within team training. Team training tends to be focused specifically on skill development. And you often see, you know, it's a combination of kind of information, demonstration, practice, and feedback. And oftentimes the teams will get, you know, a chance to practice and getting feedback on those KSAs that they're learning. Here are some of the things that are in the literature that have been shown to be effective. Cross training really serves to build shared knowledge within the team. Team self-correction is one where it allows the team to do just that. It kind of takes advantage of takes advantage of a team's natural tendency to review what they've done. If you think of kind of everybody getting together after a sports team or something, but it's a structured intervention. Team coordination training gets at those coordinated activities, performance monitoring, and that's where a lot of this leadership and a lot of the stuff will come into play. Crew resource management is very similar. This comes out of the airline industry, focused on decision-making, shared situation awareness. So again, making sure that everybody on the team has an understanding of what's going on in the environment. And I think the last one, because I know I'm a few minutes over, the last one I wanted to just highlight here are team debriefs. These are really, really powerful, not difficult to do. It's a structured intervention where the team learns from their experience. So really, really recommend people going into the literature and kind of digging into this. Great to do after you've written an article or after a proposal activity. They've been shown to improve performance by up to 25%. They can be used, you know, in the situation or within a training context, within a simulated environment. And really what it is you're going in and you're reviewing what's been done. So it's active self-learning. It's got a developmental intent. You're reviewing specific incidents. So normally you would set up beforehand, you know, hey, we want, as a team, we want to review how we're doing, let's say, in our communication and our decision-making capabilities. And then on the back end, you would come and you would talk about specific events tied to instances of communication and decision-making. And the team would talk about what they did well as areas of improvement. The key here is it's not one person, it's not the leader, it's not the manager, it's not one person getting up and telling the team what they did well and what they didn't do well. It's really this active involvement where the team is taking ownership for this. Just some best practices, you know, schedule it at a regular time and place. Create a climate that's kind of this learning environment. Again, that can be facilitated by the leader, the team leader. And I already kind of talked about this, but here are 4 questions. You know, what were we trying to accomplish? Did we hit it? Did we hit our goals of what we were doing? What should we start, stop, and continue? And then make an action plan. So don't just stop at this is what we did well and what we didn't do well, but for those things that we could improve on, how might we go about that? There's been a lot of research done on this. Facilitated debriefs are 3 times more effective than ones that aren't facilitated. Again, make sure that the positive and negative aspects, and it really depends on it relies on this climate of psychological safety, because members have to feel free to be able to speak up without fear of retribution. And I will skip this. This is just things that you can also do on the front end to help build expectations and mental models about how the team or how that intervention is going to take place. Okay. Sorry for going a little bit over that last slide this slide, if you guys want to look at this, it basically takes everything that we kind of talked about and kind of lays it out on very nicely, an article by Shuffler et al. That lays all this out together that I've kind of talked about separately. And with that, I guess I can open it up for questions or.
This is Kelly Stout from Georgia State. I have a question. So when you have a very limited number of people from which you can pull a team together, you can't sort of pick the best of all the characteristics. What would you say some of the top best practices for those teams when you may have some of these potential, you can see there's a potential for issues? What would you say is one of the best practices to impose upon that team that might help it towards success?
I think, in my opinion, having the leader of that team would have a huge is a huge way to kind of be able to come in and set up the norms. And even if we have this potentially not the best mix of personalities, right? But trying to build cohesion to the goal that they're doing and showing the importance and the meaningfulness of the work that they're doing sometimes can help, as well as that leader kind of modeling the behavior that you want to see. Because eventually sometimes what ends up happening is by the leader modeling that, and then other team members beginning to model that person that may not be playing as nicely, begins to feel some of that peer pressure and may, help them to be a better contributor. Anybody else?
If no one else has
Kelly,
a question, if no one else has a question, I also want to get your just sort of how do you feel personally about the use of a facilitator on a team? Is that something, if you can actually have a facilitator, is that something you would highly recommend, or is it dependent?
I think it would be dependent on the situation. A lot of times in my mind, I see the team leader as a potential facilitator, but if you're having a lot of problems internal to the team, then sometimes having somebody come in, an outside facilitator can sometimes help to kind of work through those issues. Better than someone that's really close to the team.
So I have a question, but I'm not sure like if that's like really related, but like as a team member, what's the best way to approach the team leader to give feedback if they don't ask for feedback?
So if you feel that the team leader is not being all that they can be, but they haven't asked you for feedback, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or about the team in general, not specifically about the leader, but like about the team.
I don't know, other than trying to, think about that there's lots of, depending on the team, there's lots of evidence that speaks to the fact that, teams that kind of regularly review their processes end up performing better. So, I don't know if it would depend on the climate. It would depend if, it just hasn't come up, then it's much easier to kind of suggest it, right? Versus if you've got a team where the climate is almost like this toxic climate. I think those are two very different situations. In the place where it hasn't come up, I think it's much easier than, what can we do better? It may be that people just haven't thought about that, that it's not this natural, but it's hard to do if there's not this climate of psychological safety that hopefully is established by the leader.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Edwin. A very nice team development talk, and one slide that you showed is very interesting, where you showed about the phase approach. So in your experience, how long does it take for that transition period to happen?
I think it just depends on the team. I don't have a specific answer, and I don't know if there's an answer out in the literature. I think it's gonna depend on it's going to depend on the type of activities that the team is doing, right? So there's things that you can do to kind of make that initial period, to condense it. But in terms of just if you let a team go on its own, I think it would be, I think there would be a wide variation, hopefully it doesn't take days to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're talking days, but at the same time, I think a lot depends on the makeup of that team that you're talking about. If they're already alike, in a lot of areas, then those stages are probably going to go much quicker than if you have a very diverse team. So that's why I tried to, when you guys came together, even something as simple as, find something in common, because it begins to give you a type of connection that you can then use to build on.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you, Shawn, for presenting to us today. And for the attendees, if you get a chance, make sure to fill out the evaluation form. We use that to try to improve each of the sessions as we go along, incorporating your feedback. So it'd be really great if you have just a chance to fill that out. It shouldn't take too long, and we can use that to develop the next one. And yep, that's it. See you again next month. And thanks again, Shawn, for putting this on today.
Sure. I just wanted to say, if anybody has any questions that they didn't want to bring up in front of everybody or whatever, I didn't put this on the slides, but you can always send me an email, and that's sburke, B-U-R-K-E, at ist.ucf.edu.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks
Thank you,
all.
guys.
Have a great weekend.